Brittany set 2 glasses of sweet tea on my own kitchen table. She told me the house was hers now. She'd already ordered the realtor's sign. She'd already picked a colour for the shutters. She looked at me the way you look at a chair you're about to donate. My son sat next to her. He said nothing. He studied the tablecloth like it owed him money. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I finished my tea. I set the glass down soft. I asked her one question. Whose name is on the deed, Brittany? She blinked. She didn't know. She'd never once checked. That's the moment I knew how this was going to end. I'd known for 2 years. She hadn't known for 6. But before any of that, before the tea, before the sign, before the question that emptied the room, there was a woman named Louise, a kitchen table with a legal pad on it, a promise I made her 2 weeks before she died. My name is Harold Ashby. I am 72 years old. I didn't raise my voice that day in my kitchen. I want you to understand, I never have, not once in 50 years. I raised Barnes. I raised a boy. I never once raised my voice. There's a difference between a man who's calm because he's weak and a man who's calm because he already knows how the story ends. I ran the mill in Dennard's Mill, Kentucky. 36 years. My grandfather worked there, my father worked there. I ran the planing floor from the time I was 26 until the day it closed for good. That was back when hardwood flooring started coming cheap out of places that weren't Kentucky anymore. After that, I didn't sit down. I took my hands and my truck. I went to work as a millwright. I fixed the machines other mills couldn't afford to replace. Feed rollers, line shafts, saw arbors worn out of true. I drove 3 counties for 32 years doing that work. My knees told me to stop at 68. I want to tell you about a shaft. It matters later. A line shaft runs the length of an old mill, turning pulleys. If it warps even a 1/16 of an inch, the whole machine shakes itself apart eventually. You can't always see a warp. You have to put your palm flat against the spinning metal. You feel for the place where it stops being smooth. That's called truing it up. I've done it more times than I can count. I can find a warp in about 4 seconds, in metal or in a man, or in. I've never needed to raise my voice to do either one. My wife's name was Louise. She taught 3rd grade in Dennard's Mill for 31 years. She's the reason any of what follows makes sense. We built the house on Kettle Run Road in 1981. 4 acres that used to belong to the mill company before it sold off the land around the plant. The land itself cost us $6,000 back then. Cheap even for the time because nobody else wanted ground so close to a working mill. I poured the footings myself on weekends. Louise painted every wall in that house with her own hands. Twice because the first colour she picked, she decided after a year she hated. We raised 1 son in that house. Kevin, born in 1988. We planted a garden of tomatoes in that dirt every summer for 30-some years. When Louise got sick 4 years ago now, she asked to be moved to the front room, so she could see the garden from the bed. She died in that room. I'm not going to dwell on it. It isn't the kind of thing you dwell on out loud. But I'll tell you this. 2 weeks before she went into hospice care, she was still sharp as a tack. Twice as stubborn as I ever was too. She had me pull the kitchen chair up next to her bed. She had a legal pad. She made me write things down. She said, "Don't leave it to who loves you loudest, Harold. Leave it to who'll still be standing here in 30 years. I didn't understand what she meant that day. I understood it about 18 months later. I'll get to that. Kevin married Brittany Cole in the fall, after Louise passed. I want to be fair here. I try to be fair even when it costs me something. Kevin is not a bad man. He was always a soft one, the kind of boy who'd rather agree with you than argue with you. Louise used to say that gentleness would either save him or ruin him, depending on who he married. Brittany is not stupid either. She's sharp in a certain direction, the direction of getting what she wants without ever once asking what it costs. Her mother, Donna Cole, has been in Kevin and Brittany's ear since the wedding. Always about money, always about what the two of them deserved. I gave them plenty. I want that on the record. Nobody who tells this story later gets to say I was a tight old man with his fist closed. I paid $9,000, half their wedding, without being asked. I gave them the down payment on their first house in town. $41,000. No note, no interest. A gift outright. When Kevin's transmission went out on his truck, I paid the $3,800 to fix it, without being asked twice. I bought Ruthie's first bicycle for $110 the summer she turned 6. I never once mentioned the receipt. I have never once in my life made my son feel like my hand was closed. But somewhere in the last 2 years, a change came into that house. I noticed it the way you notice a shaft losing true, a little at a time, until one day it's shaking the whole machine. It started small. Brittany stopped calling it your house. She started calling it the house. The way you talk about property you were managing, rather than a place your father-in-law lived. She'd walk through my kitchen and open cabinets like she was doing inventory. She brought a decorator by once, just to get some ideas, she said, while I was standing right there at my own stove. I let it go. I told myself grief makes people strange sometimes. I told myself Louise would want me to be patient with the girl Kevin picked, even if patience was starting to cost me something I couldn't quite name yet. Then, about a year ago, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. I'd gone out to my workshop. It sits behind the house, the same shed I've kept my mill tools in since 1979. The window was open. Brittany was on the back porch on her phone, talking to her mother. She didn't know I was close enough to hear. She said, once he's gone, this whole property's worth 400 and some thousand. Easy. Especially if we split off the back 2 acres and sell them separate. She said, Kevin's the only kid. It's not like anybody's going to fight us on it. She said, he's 71, Mum. He's not going to be around forever. It's not like he needs 4 acres and a 5-bedroom house just for himself. I stood there in my own workshop with a wrench in my hand. I didn't say a word. I finished tightening the bolt I'd started. That's what you do when a shaft first shows you it's out of true. You don't shut the whole machine down in a panic. You watch it a little longer. You confirm what you're seeing. Then you decide what to do about it. Here's what Brittany didn't know that day. She still didn't know it 2 years later when she set 2 glasses of sweet tea in front of me and told me the house was hers. 18 months before she made that phone call, I had already sat down with Estelle Vance, the lawyer I've kept on a modest $200 a month retainer since the week Louise got her diagnosis. I had already done exactly what my late wife asked me to do, at her bedside, with a legal pad in her lap. I want to back up and tell you about that legal pad conversation properly. It's the whole spine of what happened later. I don't want to rush past it, the way people rush past the things that matter most. Louise was dying. She knew it. I knew it. Neither one of us pretended otherwise. That wasn't how our marriage worked. We didn't lie to each other, not even to be kind. She had me write down everything the house was worth to her. Not in dollars, in memory. The garden, the porch swing I built her in 1994. For $80 in cedar lumber and a Saturday afternoon. The kitchen table where she graded 3 decades of spelling tests. Then she had me write down every name in the family. Next to each name, she had me write one word, describing what that person had actually shown her in 30-some years about their character. Next to Kevin's name, she had me write kind but bends. Next to Brittany's name, she had me write watches the furniture. I asked her what she meant by that. She said, some people walk into a room and look at the people in it. Some people walk into a room and look at what's in it. Brittany looks at what's in it, Harold. I've watched her do it at every holiday for 3 years. Then she had me write down the name of Kevin and Brittany's daughter, our granddaughter, Ruthie. She was 5 years old at the time. Next to Ruthie's name, Louise had me write, the only one who ever asked to help me in the garden without being told to. She looked at me. She said the sentence I already told you. Don't leave it to who loves you loudest, Harold. Leave it to who'll still be standing here in 30 years. I didn't act on it right away. Grief doesn't let you act on much of anything right away. But about 6 months after she passed, once I could think straight again, I drove into town. I sat down across from Estelle Vance's desk. I told her what Louise had said, word for word. I never forgot a syllable of it. Estelle is a serious woman, close to 60. She's been practicing law in 3 counties, longer than some of my former customers have been alive. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. That's a rare quality in a lawyer, or anybody else. Then she said, Harold, what you're describing is a trust. We can build it so tight that nobody, and she meant nobody, could unwind it. Not without going through me, or through a court. On my terms, not theirs. So we built one. It cost me $3,200 in legal fees to do it properly. I considered it the best money I ever spent in my life. It took about 4 months, moving the deed to the house, the 4 acres, the workshop, and $18,000 worth of mill equipment I still owned, all of it into a revocable trust. Me as trustee for as long as I lived. The sole beneficiary of the real property. my granddaughter Ruthie Ashby. The trust would only distribute to her directly, in stages, once she turned 25. Not Kevin, not Brittany, Ruthie. I recorded that trust at the county clerk's office in the spring, almost 2 years before Brittany ever set 2 glasses of sweet tea in front of me and told me the house was hers now. It has sat there this whole time, a matter of public record, plain as day. For anybody who bothered to walk into that office and ask to see it, nobody ever did. Nobody ever asked whose name was actually on the deed. They just assumed. The way people assume the ground under their feet is solid, right up until somebody shows them the survey. I want to tell you what happened in the 2 years between that filing and the day at my kitchen table. A lot happened. None of it was loud. All of it mattered. Ruthie was 6 that first summer after the trust was recorded. She'd come out to my workshop on Saturday mornings. While Kevin mowed the yard, she'd sit on an overturned bucket and watch me work. She asked more questions in an hour than most grown men ask me in a year. What's that for? Why does it spin that way? Why do you put your hand on it like that? I told her about truing up a shaft. I put her small hand flat on a piece of pipe I had spinning slow in the vise. I told her, feel for the place where it isn't smooth. She found it on the second try. Most grown men take me showing them 4 or 5 times. Louise would have loved that girl. I think about that more than I say out loud. Brittany, meanwhile, kept doing what Brittany does, which is circle. She brought her mother, Donna, by more and more, always with some reason. Helping me organise my files, she called it once. Going through drawers in my study that had nothing to do with her. Checking on me, she called it another time. Showing up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. Remarking a little too loud on how tired I looked. How the yard was getting away from me. How a man my age really shouldn't be climbing a ladder to clean his own gutters anymore. I let her say it. I climbed the ladder anyway. About 8 months ago, Kevin came by alone one evening, without Brittany. That had gotten rare enough that I noticed it, the way you notice weather changing. He sat on the porch with me a while, not saying much. Then he said, "Dad, Brittany thinks maybe it's time we talk about the future, about the house, about what happens." I asked him what he meant by what happens. He looked at his hands. He said, "In case something happens to you. Insurance, planning, that kind of thing." I told him I already had a plan. It was handled. He didn't need to worry about it. He looked relieved to hear it, the way Kevin always looks relieved when a hard conversation gets shorter than he expected. He didn't ask what the plan was. That's the thing about my son. He has never once, in his whole life, asked me the follow-up question. Louise used to say that was the softest part of him, and the most dangerous part of him. At the same time, I should have pushed him that night. I know that now. But I loved him too much to make him choose a side before he was ready. I told myself there was still time. There wasn't as much time as I thought. 3 months after Kevin sat on my porch and didn't ask the follow-up question, Brittany started talking about my memory. It began at Thanksgiving. I told the same story twice in one dinner, about the time a saw arbor came apart at the mill in 1988 and nearly took my hand off. Brittany looked at Donna across the table. She said, "Isn't that the 3rd time this month, Mum?" With a little laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Kevin didn't correct her. I told that story exactly twice in 6 months. Both times because somebody asked me a direct question about it. But I let the comment sit there. Arguing about your own memory in front of your family is a losing hand, no matter how right you are. By Christmas, it had gotten more specific. Brittany mentioned, in front of my sister-in-law, that I'd left the stove on the week before. That was true. For about 4 minutes, Ruthie had asked me a question about frost on the window, and I'd gotten distracted showing her the ice patterns. Brittany didn't mention the 4 minutes. She mentioned the stove being on, like it was a house fire I'd narrowly escaped through sheer luck. Here's the plain truth of it, and it matters more than almost anything else in this story. I was not confused. I was not forgetful. I have run 3 counties worth of mill repair jobs by memory alone, kept every invoice straight in my head before I ever wrote a number down. At 72, I could still true a shaft blindfolded faster than a man half my age with both eyes open. What was happening was not decline. What was happening was a story being built, one small brick at a time, in front of an audience, so that later, when the story needed to hold weight, nobody would question the foundation. I'd seen buildings go up the same way, slow, deliberate, one course of block at a time, until the structure could carry whatever they meant to put on top of it. In February, Donna Cole started coming by on her own, without Brittany, always around the same time of day, always with a reason. She'd bring soup I hadn't asked for. She'd ask, gentle as anything, whether I'd thought about downsizing, now that the house was so big for one person. She used the word simplify more than any human being has ever used that word in a single conversation. Simplify your life, Harold. Simplify things for Kevin. Wouldn't it simplify everything if you just let the kids handle the paperwork? I told her every time that my paperwork was handled. She always smiled like she didn't quite believe me, the way you smile at a child who insists he already brushed his teeth. What I didn't know yet, and wouldn't find out until later, was that Donna Cole had her own reason for wanting my paperwork handled a certain way. It had nothing to do with me at all. In March, I drove into town to see Estelle Vance, mostly just to check in, the way I did every few months since Louise passed. Estelle's office sits above the old hardware store on Church Street, 2 rooms with a window unit that rattles louder than a bad bearing. She keeps a fireproof drawer in the back. Every document I've ever signed lives in its own folder there, dated and initialed. I told her what had been happening, the comments about my memory, the soup, the words simplify. Estelle listened the way she always listens, without her face giving anything away. Then she opened the drawer and pulled the trust folder. She set it on the desk between us. It's still exactly what we built, she said. Recorded, dated, filed at the courthouse. Nobody can touch it without going through probate court. There's nothing to probate because you're alive and it's a living trust. If anybody tries to have you declared incompetent to unwind it, that's a legal fight they would lose. Lose badly. Because you walked in here yourself, sober and sharp, and signed every page in front of a notary, who is still very much alive. She'd testify to that in a heartbeat. I asked her plain whether somebody could try anyway, whether a family could get a doctor to sign something, get a judge to look the other way. The kind of thing you hear about happening to old men who don't have anybody watching their back. Estelle looked at me for a long moment. It happens, she said. More than people think. It usually starts exactly the way you're describing. Little comments. A pattern being built for later. If it ever gets that far, Harold, you call me before you call anybody else. Not after. I told her I would. I meant it. She also told me something else that day. Almost as an aside. I filed it away without understanding its full weight yet. She mentioned that trusts like mine sometimes get challenged, not because the family actually believes the trustee is incompetent, but because the family badly needs money. A court fight, even a losing one, buys time. Sometimes it buys a settlement just to make the fight go away. Watch for financial pressure, she said. That's usually the real engine. The incompetence claim is just the vehicle. I didn't know yet what financial pressure Brittany or Donna might be under. I would find out soon enough. Not from either one of them. In April, I went out to my workshop on a Saturday. There was something I'd been putting off for longer than I should have. There's a drawer built into the workbench, low on the left side. I built it myself back in 1979. A lock I made from an old cabinet hinge and a hasp. Nothing fancy, but sturdy. I told Kevin when he was a boy never to open that drawer. He never had. Not once. Not even out of curiosity. That tells you something about the kind of boy he was, and the kind of man he became. I hadn't opened it myself in almost 2 years. Not since before Louise died. I sat down on the shop stool. I worked the lock. I lifted the lid. Inside, on top of some old tax records and a coffee can of hardware, was an envelope with my name on it in Louise's handwriting. I recognised her hand instantly. The particular slant she had on capital letters, from 31 years of writing on a classroom chalkboard. I hadn't remembered putting it there. I sat with it in my lap a long while before I opened it. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, written the same week as the legal pad conversation at her bedside. And a second smaller envelope sealed, with one word on the front, Ruthie. Louise's letter to me said things I'm not going to repeat all of here. Some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you the part that matters to this story. She wrote that she'd watched Ruthie in the garden more times than I probably noticed. That she'd watched the girl kneel down without being asked, and pull a weed from around a tomato plant the exact way Louise had taught her. Gentle, at the roots, never yanking. She wrote that she believed, with everything left in her, that Ruthie was going to grow into the kind of person who stayed, the kind who showed up on Sundays even after everyone else stopped. She wrote that whatever we decided to do with the house and the land, she wanted Ruthie's name attached to it somehow. Someday, when she was old enough to understand what it meant. She wrote one more line that I read probably a dozen times sitting on that shop stool. She wrote, "I know I already told you not to leave it to who loves you loudest. I mean it twice as much now that I've written it down." I put the sealed envelope for Ruthie back exactly where I found it. I decided right there that she'd get it the day she turned 18, not a day before. That felt like what Louise would have wanted. A letter like that deserves to land on a girl old enough to hold the whole weight of it. I locked the drawer again. I sat in that workshop another 20 minutes before I trusted my hands enough to drive home. It was the following week that I learned from a source I never expected exactly what kind of pressure Brittany and Donna were actually under. I've known Marlene Fitch for going on 30 years. She works the front counter at the Dennards Mill County Annex, handling deed filings and tax records. Back when I still had the mill running, she used to process our permits twice a year, quick as anything. Marlene doesn't waste a person's time. I'd gone in that Tuesday to pull a copy of my own trust filing, just to have a fresh one for my files. Nothing urgent. While she was pulling it, she mentioned, the way small-town people mention things, that she'd seen Donna Cole's name come across her desk recently. In a very different context. A notice of default. A construction loan Donna had co-signed 2 years back with Brittany for a lakefront rental property out past Barron River. A duplex they'd been renting out to weekend tourists. 4 payments behind, right around $18,000 in arrears. The bank had already sent the first formal warning. If it went another 60 days without a payment, it would head toward foreclosure. Marlene didn't tell me this to gossip. She told me because she knows me, because she could tell, the way people in a small town can tell, that it might matter to me somehow. She was right, though neither of us said so out loud. I drove home that afternoon. I sat in my truck in my own driveway for a long time before I went inside. Everything lined up at once. The way a machine finally makes sense once you find the one part that's actually broken. The comments about my memory. The soup. The words simplify. Donna's visits. Always alone. Always gentle. Always circling the same subject. It wasn't about my well-being. It had never been about my well-being. Brittany and her mother needed money. Real money. Fast. They had convinced themselves, or maybe just hoped hard enough, that my house and my land were going to solve that problem for them. Whether I was ready to give it up or not. I didn't say anything to Kevin about what I knew. I didn't say anything to Brittany. I went back to Estelle Vance instead. I told her everything Marlene had told me. Estelle wrote it all down in that careful hand of hers. She said, "This confirms exactly what I suspected. When people push this hard on an old man's competency, Harold, it is almost never about the old man. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Keep your head down. Let them show their whole hand before you show yours." So that's what I did. I kept my head down. I fixed my own gutters. I fed Ruthie shop-made peanut brittle every Saturday. I taught her how to find the warp in a spinning shaft, palm flat, eyes closed. I let Brittany bring her decorator by one more time. I let Donna bring her soup. I said nothing at all about a notice of default sitting in a county filing cabinet 3 miles away. Nothing about a trust sitting in that same building that had been public record for going on 2 years. I was waiting. Not out of fear. Out of the same patience I'd used my whole working life. Watching a shaft spin a little longer before I decided exactly where to put my hand. It was 2 weeks later that Brittany set 2 glasses of sweet tea on my kitchen table and told me the house was hers now. I want to walk you through that afternoon slow. I've replayed it 100 times since. Every time I noticed something new about how carefully she'd planned it. She came by on a Sunday. That was not her habit. Kevin came with her. So did Ruthie. That told me right away this was meant to look like a family visit, rather than what it actually was. Brittany brought a pitcher of sweet tea she'd made herself. She poured 2 glasses before I'd even offered. She set one in front of me like she was hosting me in my own kitchen. "Harold," she said, "we need to talk about the house." I told her I was listening. "Kevin and I have been thinking," she said. I noticed Kevin didn't nod, didn't add anything. Just looked at the tablecloth, the way a man looks at something he wishes he could disappear into. "You're 72. This place is too much for one person. The yard, the upkeep, the stairs. We think it's time to talk about you moving somewhere smaller and letting us take over the house. Take over, I said. Not a question, just repeating it. The way you repeat a measurement back to make sure you heard it right. It should come to Kevin eventually anyway, she said. It only makes sense to start the transition now, while you're still around to help us understand everything. The utilities, the taxes, all of it. We already talked to a realtor about what the place might be worth, if we ever needed to sell off part of the land. And Mum found a really nice assisted living community out past Bowling Green. Clean, modern. You'd have your own room. She said it all so smoothly, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. I looked at Ruthie, sitting quiet at the end of the table, watching all of us with those same sharp eyes she'd had since she was small enough to sit on a bucket in my workshop. She didn't say anything. She wasn't old enough yet to know what she was watching. But she'd remember it. Children remember more than we think. I set my glass down. Soft. No clatter. Whose name is on the deed, Brittany? I said. She blinked. What? The deed to this house, I said. Whose name is on it? You just told me it should come to Kevin eventually anyway. I'm asking you a simple question. Whose name is on it right now? She looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at his hands. I mean, it's yours, she said. A little less smooth now. I just assumed, obviously when the time comes, it'll pass to Kevin. He's your only... That's not what I asked, I said. I asked whose name is on the deed. Today. Right now. Have either one of you ever actually walked into the county clerk's office and looked? Neither of them answered, because neither of them ever had. 6 years of marriage, 2 years of soup and simplify and gentle comments about my memory. However many conversations Brittany had had with her mother about what my property was worth once I was gone. Not one of them had ever once done the simplest thing a person can do with a piece of property. Ask the county who actually owns it. I didn't tell her the answer that day. I want you to understand why. It wasn't spite, it was patience. Estelle had told me to let them show their whole hand before I showed mine. Brittany hadn't shown all of it yet. I still didn't know the exact number on Donna's foreclosure notice. I still didn't know how far Brittany was willing to go, once a soft conversation over sweet tea stopped working. I found out 3 weeks later. It was further than I expected. 3 weeks after that Sunday tea, Donna Cole showed up at my house on a Wednesday afternoon with a man I'd never met. She introduced him as Dr. Neil Prather. A family physician, she said, who specialises in geriatric wellness checks. He had a leather folder under his arm, a smile that reminded me of a salesman who's been told to look concerned. Donna said she'd made the appointment just as a precaution. Since I'd been having some trouble lately, wouldn't it be easier to just get a quick evaluation done here at home, instead of dragging me into a clinic? I stood in my own doorway. I looked at both of them a long moment. I didn't make this appointment, I said. I made it for you, Donna said, with that same soft smile she'd been wearing for 2 years, over soup and simplify. Sometimes it's hard to see these things in ourselves, Harold. That's what family's for. I could have shut the door right there. Part of me wanted to. But Estelle's voice was in my head, telling me to let them show their whole hand. I understood, standing there, that this was the hand. This was what simplify had actually meant the entire time. Come in, I said. I let Dr. Prather ask his questions. What year is it? Who's the president? Count backward from 100 by sevens. Draw a clock face. Set the hands to 10 past 11. I did every single one of them without missing a beat. The same way I could true a shaft blindfolded. There was nothing wrong with my mind. Never had been. I watched Dr. Prather's face the whole time. I watched it change, slow and unmistakable, from a man expecting to write a certain kind of report, to a man realising he wasn't going to be able to write it. When he finished, he sat back. He looked at Donna, a little uncomfortable. Mr. Ashby's cognition is entirely intact, he said. Better than intact. I don't see anything here that would support a competency concern. Donna's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went flat just for a second before she caught herself and smiled again. Well, that's wonderful news, she said, in a voice that didn't sound like it thought the news was wonderful at all. After they left, I sat on my porch for a long time. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment. It matters more than the anger, which I did feel. plenty of it. Cold and quiet, the way anger sits in a man who spent his whole life keeping it in one place. What I felt more than anger was clarity. Whatever line existed between Brittany asking me to consider moving somewhere smaller and Brittany's mother showing up unannounced with a doctor to build a paper trail toward guardianship, that line had just been crossed, deliberately. With a folder and a smile, I called Estelle Vance that same evening. They brought a doctor to the house, I told her, without asking me, trying to get a competency evaluation on the record. There was a pause on the line. When Estelle spoke again, her voice had a different edge to it than I'd heard from her before. Harold, I need you to write down everything right now while it's fresh. The doctor's name, the exact questions he asked, what Donna said when he introduced himself, what she said afterward, everything. This is exactly the pattern I warned you about. Now we have it happening in real time, which means we can document it in real time. I wrote it all down that night at my kitchen table, in my own hand. The way Louise used to write things down, dated at the top, same as always. I made 2 copies. I drove one to Estelle's office myself the next morning. I watched her put it in the fireproof drawer, in the folder with my name on it, next to the trust. This is good, she said, reading it over. This is very good, and I don't mean good the way you mean it when a machine's fixed. I mean it's good evidence. If they ever do try to challenge the trust on competency grounds, this documents, in Donna Cole's own actions, that the family was actively building a paper trail toward guardianship while you were of clear and demonstrated sound mind. That cuts entirely against them. What do I do now? I asked her. Nothing for a little while longer, Estelle said. Let them believe the doctor visit didn't accomplish what they wanted, but let them keep believing you still don't know what's actually driving this. The moment you show your hand, they stop making mistakes. Right now, they're still making mistakes. Mistakes are useful, Harold. Let them make a few more. So I did. I want you to understand what that patience cost me. It wasn't free. Every day I said nothing. I sat across a table from a woman who had brought a doctor into my house to try to have me declared incapable. I poured her sweet tea back when she visited. I asked after her mother's health. I let Kevin believe his father was simply a stubborn old man, slow to accept help he didn't need. It cost something, holding alive a mission that long, even when the lie is a shield and not a sword. Ruthie kept coming to the workshop on Saturdays the whole time. That never stopped. I never let it stop. Whatever was happening between the adults in that family, I wasn't going to let it touch the one relationship in it that had never once cost me anything. One Saturday in May, she asked me a question I still think about. Papa, she said, why does Mommy always ask you about the house? I looked at her a long moment. She was 8 years old enough to notice things, not old enough yet to be told all of what those things meant. Because your mommy thinks the house is the important part, I told her. But it isn't. The house is just boards and nails. I could build another one in a summer if I had to. The important part was your grandmother. She picked the paint colours. She planted the garden. She taught 3rd grade to half this town. She loved every single person in this family, more than she loved that house. You remember that part? The boards don't matter half as much as people think. She thought about that a while. The way she thought about everything, careful and slow. I remember Grandma's garden, she said. The tomatoes. That's the part that matters, I told her. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation would come back to me later, in a room full of people, in a way I never expected. It was 2 weeks after that when Kevin invited me to Sunday dinner at his and Brittany's house in town. He hadn't done that in longer than I cared to count. I went. Because he's my son. Because Louise would have told me to go. Because I wanted to see for myself how far things had drifted. Brittany was in high spirits that evening, pouring wine, laughing loud at her own jokes, the way people laugh when they've decided a plan is finally working, even if it hasn't actually worked yet. Somewhere around the second course, she raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. This family's got a lot to look forward to. I raised my glass along with everyone else. That's what you do at a family dinner. Then I asked, in the mildest voice I owned, a question I already knew the answer to. How's your mother's lake property doing, Brittany? Kevin mentioned she picked up a rental out past Barron River a couple years back. Bet that's a nice little income for her. I watched the colour leave Brittany's face like water draining out of a sink. Kevin looked at her, confused. As far as I could tell, he still didn't know a thing about the foreclosure notice sitting in a county file 3 miles from where we were eating. It's, Brittany said. It's fine. Just some seasonal stuff. Slow this time of year. That's so, I said. I let it sit there. I took another bite of my dinner. I let the silence do the rest of the work. Silence, held right, does more work than a raised voice ever could. Donna, sitting across the table, was watching me now with a different expression than the soft, gentle one she usually wore. For the first time in 2 years, I think she suspected I knew something. She didn't know how much. Neither did Brittany. But something had shifted in that room. Everybody at that table felt it, even if only one of us understood exactly what it was. I drove home that night thinking about Louise's line about the 2 ledgers. I didn't have her exact words for it yet. I only knew that everything in this family had 2 versions now, the version spoken out loud, about downsizing and simplifying and new beginnings, and the version underneath it, about a construction loan 4 payments behind and a doctor brought to my door with a folder under his arm. I called Estelle the next morning. I told her about the dinner. She was quiet a moment. Then she said something that changed the shape of everything that came after. Harold, she said, I think it's time we stop just documenting what they're doing to you. Started thinking about what happens when this comes to a head. Because it is going to come to a head. People under that kind of financial pressure don't stay patient forever. They escalate. I want you to think seriously about how and where you want the truth to come out. Because when it does, I want it to come out on your terms, in a room you choose, in front of the people who need to hear it, not in a courtroom they dragged you into. I sat with that a long time before I answered her. There's a way to do that, I said slowly. There always is. You just have to be patient enough to wait for the right room. Then let's find the right room, Estelle said. Because I don't think we have much longer to wait. She was right. We had, as it turned out, almost exactly 6 weeks. The 6 weeks Estelle mentioned started moving faster than either of us expected. About 10 days after that Sunday dinner, Brittany called me directly. She almost never did that. Her voice had a brightness to it that didn't match the words coming out of her mouth. Harold, she said. So, good news. I found a realtor who specialises in properties like yours, older homes with acreage. She thinks we could get $420,000 for the house and the full 4 acres. Or we could split it. Sell the back 2 acres separate to a developer for around $160,000. Still keep the house and 2 acres for the family. Either way, it's a great time to sell. I haven't put the house up for sale, Brittany, I said. I know, she said quickly. I'm just saying if you did decide it was time, the numbers are really good right now. I already had her come out and do a walkthrough, actually, just so we'd have real numbers instead of guessing. I sat with the phone against my ear a long moment. You had a realtor walk through my house without asking me. It's not a big deal, Harold. She just looked around from the driveway and the porch. She didn't go inside without permission or anything. A pause. Mostly. I want to tell you exactly what mostly turned out to mean. I found out 3 days later from my neighbour Gary Whitlock. He's lived across Kettle Run Road from me for going on 20 years. Gary mentioned, friendly as anything, that he'd seen a woman with a clipboard walking my property line the previous Tuesday, while I was in town at Estelle's office. Brittany's car had been parked in my driveway the whole time. They'd been inside. While I wasn't home. Measuring rooms, most likely. For a listing, they hadn't asked me to approve. I didn't confront Brittany about it. Not yet. I called Estelle instead. I told her. She added it to the folder. Another dated page in a growing stack. A family building a case for a sale that was never theirs to make. They're getting desperate, Estelle said. That's not a criticism, Harold. It's a diagnosis. Desperate people move faster and sloppier. That works in our favour, as long as we don't let it rush us. It was around this time that I finally learned the full shape of what Brittany and Donna were up against. Marlene Fitch, bless her, came by my house one evening after her shift. Off the clock. Just as a friend. She told me the rest of it. The notice of default on the lakefront duplex had escalated. The bank had filed formal foreclosure paperwork. Donna Cole had 60 days to bring the loan current, roughly $22,000, including fees and back interest. Or the property would go to a sheriff's sale. Donna didn't have $22,000. Neither did Brittany. What they had, or thought they had, was a father-in-law with a 5-bedroom house and 4 acres worth $400,000. A plan to convince that father-in-law, one soft conversation and one doctor's visit at a time. that it was time to let the family help him simplify. 60 days. That was the clock Brittany and Donna were racing. They didn't know I knew the time on it. I told Estelle everything Marlene had told me. She sat back in her chair. She thought a long while. Here's what I want to do, she said finally. I want to get ahead of their timeline instead of just reacting to it. Right now they're planning to keep pressuring you quietly, hoping either you'll cave or a guardianship petition will eventually stick. I think we call a family meeting. Here in my office, you tell them you've decided it's time to discuss the future of the estate, which is true in its own way. You invite Kevin and Brittany. I'll be there as your attorney of record. We control the room. We control the timeline. We control exactly what gets said and in what order. And Donna? I asked. Your call, Estelle said. But given her financial situation is the actual engine here, I'd want her in that room too. Some things are more effective heard directly than second-hand. I thought about Louise's kitchen table, the legal pad, the promise I'd made her. I thought about Ruthie on the overturned bucket, learning to find the warp in a spinning shaft by feel. I thought about a doctor with a leather folder standing in my own front hallway. Set the meeting, I told Estelle. 2 weeks from Friday. I want to tell you about the 2 weeks that followed. They were, in some ways, the hardest of the whole ordeal. Harder even than the day at the kitchen table. I had to keep living an ordinary life around people I knew were, in their own minds, circling a wounded animal. Meanwhile, I was quietly finishing loading the gun I intended to never actually have to fire. I went back to the county clerk's office one more time, this time with Estelle, to pull a certified, dated copy of the trust filing, so there would be no question of authenticity in the room. I sat with Estelle. We reviewed line by line exactly what the trust said, exactly what powers I held as trustee during my lifetime, exactly what would happen to the property the moment I died, or became incapacitated by an actual, medically documented, court-verified process. A bar Dr. Prather's visit had already failed to clear. I also, on my own, without telling Estelle first, drove out to visit Ruthie's school on a Tuesday afternoon during recess, just to sit on the low wall by the playground and watch her for a few minutes. She didn't see me. I wasn't there to be seen. I just wanted, before everything that was coming, to remind myself exactly why any of it mattered. It would have been easy in the run-up to that Friday to let the whole thing become about winning against Brittany and Donna. I didn't want it to be about winning. I wanted it to be about a promise I'd made a dying woman at her bedside, and a little girl who pulled weeds gentle, at the root, the way she'd been taught. 3 days before the meeting, Kevin called me. Just Kevin, no Brittany on the line. Dad, he said, Brittany told me you asked for a family meeting at the lawyer's office. What's this about? Are you okay? Is something wrong? I could hear something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Real worry, not performance. I decided right then to give my son one piece of the truth. Early. Not the whole thing, but enough. I'm fine, Kevin, I said. Better than fine. I just think it's time this family understood a few things clearly. All together, in one room, instead of piecemeal, the way it's been happening. That's all I'm going to say before Friday. There was a long pause on the line. Brittany's been talking about the house a lot, Kevin said, quiet. And Donna's been talking about, guardianship stuff. I told her I didn't think that was right, Dad. I want you to know I told her that. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that my son had told me he'd pushed back on anything Brittany or Donna wanted. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough. Not yet. But it was something. A small crack of daylight in a wall that had been solid for 2 years. I let myself feel something close to hope, sitting there with the phone in my hand. I appreciate you telling me that, I said. I'll see you Friday. The morning of the meeting, I got up early, the way I always have. I drove out to the cemetery before I went anywhere else. Louise is buried under an oak tree on the east side, the plot we picked together 11 years before she needed it. That's the kind of practical woman she was, planning even the shape of her own rest. I stood there a while with my hat in my hands, the way I do every time I visit. I told her, out loud, because there was nobody around to hear an old man talk to a headstone, that I was about to do exactly what she asked me to do, at her bedside, with a legal pad in her lap. I hope I did it right, Lou, I said. I hope this is what you meant. The oak leaves moved a little in the wind. I've never believed much in signs, but I let myself take that one anyway. A man's allowed to every now and then, when he's about to do something hard. Then I got back in my truck. I drove into town, to Estelle Vance's office above the old hardware store, to finish what my wife and I had started at a kitchen table 2 years before either Brittany or Donna ever thought to ask whose name was actually on the deed. Estelle's office on Church Street has a back conference room. I'd never actually sat in it before. Just a plain oak table and 8 chairs. A window unit that hummed instead of rattled, quieter than the one up front. I noticed she'd had it serviced for the occasion. Kevin arrived first, alone, 10 minutes early. That told me something about the state of his nerves. Brittany came next, with Donna right behind her. Both of them dressed a shade more formal than a Friday afternoon called for. The way people dress when they think they're walking into a negotiation they've already won. Brittany took the seat across from me. Donna sat beside her. Kevin hesitated a second. Then he sat next to me. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that my son had chosen my side of a table without being asked. Estelle sat at the head, a single folder in front of her, closed. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "Harold asked me to help facilitate this conversation, since it involves some legal matters concerning the estate. I want to start by letting Harold say what he wants to say, and then we'll go from there." I looked around the table a moment before I spoke, at Brittany, already smiling the confident smile of a woman who believed she knew exactly how this meeting was going to go. At Donna, watching me with the sharper, more careful expression she'd worn since the day Dr. Prather failed to find anything wrong with me. At Kevin, who looked like a man bracing for weather. "I want to start," I said, "by telling you all a story about my wife." Brittany's smile flickered, just slightly. The look of someone who'd prepared for a fight about a house and gotten a eulogy instead. 2 weeks before Louise died, I said, she had me sit next to her bed with a legal pad. She made me write some things down. She told me not to leave what we'd built to whoever loved me loudest. She told me to leave it to whoever would still be standing here in 30 years. I didn't fully understand what she meant that day. I understand it completely now. I looked at Brittany. About 6 months after she passed, I said, "I came to Estelle. We built a trust. It holds the house on Kettle Run Road, the 4 acres, my workshop, and the mill equipment I still own. I am the trustee for as long as I live. The sole beneficiary of the real property, upon my death, is my granddaughter Ruthie Ashby. Distribution held until she turns 25. The room went very quiet. "That trust was recorded at the county clerk's office," I said. "Almost 2 years ago. It's been a matter of public record this entire time. Anybody could have walked in and asked to see it. Nobody ever did." Brittany's face had gone the same colour it went at that Sunday dinner, the night I asked about her mother's lake property. "Wait," she said. "Wait, that can't be right. That house is supposed to come to Kevin. We've been planning around..." "Planning around what exactly, Brittany?" Estelle asked. Mild as anything. She opened her folder for the first time. "Because I have here a dated log of contact with a realtor. She conducted an unauthorised property walkthrough on May the 14th, while Harold was not home. I have a note documenting a physician's visit on April the 9th. Arranged without Harold's consent. Dr. Neil Prather found no evidence whatsoever of cognitive impairment. And I have a certified copy of a notice of default, filed against Donna Cole and Brittany Ashby jointly, regarding a property at 214 Cove Road, Barron River, currently 61 days past the initial notice." The room got quieter still. Donna's hands, folded on the table, had gone white at the knuckles. "I don't understand," Kevin said slowly, looking between his wife and his mother-in-law. "What notice of default? Brittany, what is she talking about?" Brittany didn't answer him. She was looking at me instead. Something in her expression had shifted from confidence to something closer to fear. "Harold," she said, "I don't know what you think you know, but I know your mother co-signed a construction loan on a rental duplex 2 years ago," I said, keeping my voice exactly the same volume it had been the whole meeting. "I know it's 4 payments behind. I know the bank has filed foreclosure paperwork. I know the two of you need roughly $22,000 in the next few weeks, or that property goes to a sheriff's sale. I know that's why the soup started. I know that's why simplify became your favourite word. I know that's why a doctor showed up at my front door with a folder under his arm, asking me to count backward from 100. Donna made a small sound. Not quite a word. I don't raise my voice, I said. To the whole table now. To Kevin most of all. I never have. I true things up instead. A line shaft doesn't need a man shouting at it to fix it. It needs a hand steady enough to find exactly where it stopped running straight. I've spent 2 years finding exactly where this family stopped running straight. Brittany's hands were flat on the table, pressing down like she needed something solid under them. You're saying the house isn't Kevin's, she said. You're saying it's not ever going to be Kevin's. You gave it to an 8-year-old. I gave it to the only person in this family, I said, who ever knelt down in her grandmother's garden and pulled a weed the right way without being told how. Louise taught her that. Gentle, at the root, never yanking. I watched Ruthie do it a dozen times before I understood what I was actually watching. That's insane, Brittany said, her voice climbing for the first time. That's not how inheritance works, Harold. You can't just cut your own son out because a little girl pulls weeds nice. I didn't cut Kevin out because of a weed, Brittany, I said. I moved the property into a trust because, for 2 years, I watched you circle this house the way a buyer circles a listing. I watched your mother bring soup to a man who wasn't sick. I watched a doctor stand in my front hallway, trying to build a paper trail toward a guardianship petition. Kevin didn't do any of that. Kevin's biggest failure in all of this was staying quiet while you did it. That's a different failure. It's not the same as yours. Kevin's face had gone pale. Dad, he said, the doctor. I didn't know about the doctor. I swear to you, I didn't know Donna set that up. I believe you, I said. I meant it. That's exactly why we're having this conversation the way we're having it. Instead of a different conversation I could have had instead. Estelle let that sit a moment before she continued, calm as a woman reading a grocery list. Here is what this means practically, she said. Looking at Brittany and Donna in turn, the trust is irrevocable in the sense that matters here. It was properly executed, properly witnessed, properly recorded, at a time when Harold's competency is documented beyond any reasonable dispute, including by your own physician's visit, Donna, which I have on record as finding no impairment whatsoever. Any attempt to challenge it, whether through a competency claim or a probate action, would not only fail, it would very likely constitute grounds for a countersuit regarding harassment and attempted financial exploitation of an elder, which carries its own set of consequences under state law. Donna's face had gone from white to something closer to grey. We weren't trying to exploit anybody, she said. Quiet now. All the softness gone out of her voice. We needed help. We were going to lose the Cove Road property. I thought if Harold understood how serious it was, he'd want to help family. I would have helped, I said. That was the part that cost me the most to say out loud. It was true. I don't think any of them expected to hear it. If either of you had ever once just told me the truth, come to me and said, Harold, we're in trouble. We need help. I have helped this family before. I paid for half a wedding. I gave a down payment with no note attached. I fixed a transmission without blinking. I would have sat down and figured out what I could do for a rental property in trouble, same as I did for everything else. What I will not do is hand over the house my wife and I built with our own hands. Not because somebody decided the easiest way to solve a debt was to convince an old man he was losing his mind. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The window unit hummed. So what happens now? Kevin finally asked. His voice had a rawness to it I hadn't heard from my son in years. Now, Estelle said, the trust stands exactly as filed. The property remains held for Ruthie's benefit, with Harold as trustee for as long as he lives, per the terms we all just reviewed. Nothing about today changes that, because nothing about today needed to change it, to be. It was already true before any of you walked into this room. You simply didn't know it. I want to tell you that the meeting in Estelle's office ended everything cleanly, the way a story likes to wrap up once the truth gets said out loud. It didn't. People under real financial pressure don't stop pushing just because they've been caught. They push harder, usually in a different direction. That's exactly what happened next. Brittany left that meeting quiet. I mistook the quiet for defeat. I should have known better. Louise used to say the quietest people in a room are sometimes just recalculating, not surrendering. Brittany proved her right within the week. What she did was hire her own lawyer, a young man out of Bowling Green named Dustin Farr. For a retainer, I later learned, was $4,000, money she and Donna clearly didn't have to spare, which told me on its own how desperate they'd gotten. Farr specialised, as far as I could tell, in exactly the kind of aggressive, elder estate challenges. Estelle had warned me families sometimes attempt out of desperation, rather than any real belief they'll win. Farr filed a petition in probate court, requesting an emergency competency evaluation and a temporary conservatorship, arguing that my documented pattern of memory, lapses and susceptibility to undue influence from unrelated third parties, meaning Estelle, required immediate court intervention to protect the estate. I got served with the papers on a Tuesday morning, standing in my own driveway, in my work boots, by a process server who looked almost apologetic about it. I called Estelle before I'd even finished reading the second page. "I expected this," she said. That surprised me less than it probably should have. "Harold, listen to me carefully. This is exactly the kind of desperate move I told you to watch for. It is also, and I want you to hear this clearly, an enormous mistake on their part, because it forces the entire question into open court, in front of a judge, with a full evidentiary record. Instead of staying a private family argument, they could keep controlling the narrative of." "What do we do?" I asked her. "We show up," Estelle said, "and we bring everything. The trust, the dated log of contact, Dr. Prather's own written findings, which, by the way, work entirely in our favour now, since he's the family's own witness and he already found nothing wrong with you. The record of the unauthorised property walkthrough, the notice of default on the Cove Road property, which establishes motive beyond any reasonable doubt. We bring all of it, in front of a judge, on the record, in a courtroom that anyone, including your son, including anyone else in this town, is legally entitled to sit in and watch." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out, at the county courthouse in Bowling Green, a squat limestone building I'd driven past 1,000 times over 60 years, without ever once needing to walk inside it for something like this. I want to tell you about a phone call I got 2 days after being served. It changed the shape of everything that followed. It came from someone I never expected to hear from at all. It was Marlene Fitch again, calling me at home this time instead of stopping by. Her voice was lower than usual. Careful. The way a person sounds when they know they're about to say something that isn't strictly their business to say. "Harold," she said, "I probably shouldn't be calling you about this, and if anybody asks, I never did. But I pulled the Cove Road file again this morning. Routine business. And there's something in there Estelle needs to see. Before that hearing, Donna Cole didn't just fall behind on payments. She took out a second loan against the same property about 8 months ago, using it as collateral without disclosing the first lien to the second lender. That's not just falling behind, Harold. That's the kind of thing that gets looked at by people with badges, not just bank managers." I sat with the phone against my ear a long moment, turning that over. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked her. Honest, because it mattered to me that I understood her reasons. Because 30 years ago, when the mill was still running, you caught a supplier trying to shortchange this whole county on a load of green lumber that would have warped every floor it went into, she said. You didn't have to say anything. You could have taken the discount and let somebody else find out the hard way. You told the truth instead, even though it cost you the cheap price. I've never forgotten that. Some debts don't have a dollar figure, Harold. This is me paying one of mine. I called Estelle the moment we hung up. I could hear her sit up straighter through the phone when I told her what Marlene had found. "This matters more than you might realise," Estelle said. "If Donna misrepresented her financial position to a second lender, that's potential loan fraud. It goes a long way toward establishing, in front of a judge, exactly what kind of pressure was actually driving this family's behaviour toward you. It also means Donna Cole has far more to lose in that courtroom than just a foreclosure. I want you to understand something, Harold, and I want you to sit with it before the hearing. We are not going to use this to destroy her. We are going to use it carefully, only if Farr forces our hand to show the court the true shape of the motive. There's a difference between winning and being cruel about it. I know you well enough by now to know which one matters to you." "It matters," I told her. "Louise never once let me be cruel, even when I had good reason. I don't intend to start now." Estelle spent the better part of those 3 weeks preparing me the way you'd prepare a witness, though she never used that word. She said it made people stiffen up and sound rehearsed. A judge can smell rehearsed from the bench. I want to tell you honestly that those 3 weeks were the hardest stretch of the whole ordeal. Harder even than the meeting in Estelle's office. A courtroom carries a different kind of weight than a family conference room. In Estelle's office, I controlled the room. In a courtroom, I would be, in the eyes of the law, a man whose competency was formally in question, whether the question was legitimate or not. There is something about hearing that stated in a filed legal document, even one you know is false, that settles cold in your stomach and doesn't leave easily. I went to see Dr. Pratha myself, the week before the hearing. Not to ask him for anything, just to be plain with him about what his own report was about to be used for. He looked uncomfortable the whole visit. "I want you to know," he said, "I never told Donna Cole my findings supported a conservatorship. I told her the opposite. If anything, my report should help you, not hurt you." "It will," I told him. "That's exactly why I wanted to see you before this got any further. I wanted to look you in the eye and thank you for writing down the truth, even though I imagine it wasn't the truth Donna was hoping to hear." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, Mr. Ashby, I've done a lot of these evaluations. Most of the families requesting them have already decided what they want the answer to be before I walk in the door. Yours is one of maybe 3 times in 15 years the person being evaluated was sharper than everyone else sitting in the room." I thanked him and drove home. That night I sat on my porch a long while, thinking about Kevin. In every version of the story I turned over in my head, Kevin remained the one piece I didn't know how to place. He hadn't signed Farr's petition. His name wasn't on it. But he hadn't stopped it either. I didn't know, sitting there in the dark, whether that meant he'd finally chosen a side, or simply hadn't found the courage yet to choose one out loud. "Just tell the truth the way you told it to me the first day you sat in my office," Estelle said more than once, in those sessions. Plain, short sentences. Don't perform outrage, even if you feel it. Judges trust the person in the room who isn't performing. We went over the timeline together a dozen times. The legal pad at Louise's bedside, the trust filing, the overheard phone call in the workshop, the soup, the word simplify, the doctor with the leather folder, the unauthorized walkthrough, the notice of default Marlene had told me about. Estelle wanted every date exact, every figure exact. She said a courtroom runs on precision, the same way a mill runs on tolerances. A single loose number can make a whole true story sound built on sand. I also spent those 3 weeks doing something Estelle didn't ask me to do. She wouldn't have approved of it if I'd told her about it beforehand. I drove out to see Ruthie one Saturday. Same as always. While she sat on her bucket in the workshop, I asked her, careful, whether she understood any of what had been happening between the grown-ups lately. "Some of it," she said, in that serious way she has. "Mommy's mad about the house. Daddy's quiet all the time now. Grandma Donna cries in the car sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking." I didn't know what to say to that for a moment. 8 years old, already carrying more of this than any child should have to carry. "None of what's happening is because of anything you did," I told her. "You understand that? Not one bit of it." "I know, Papa," she said. Then, quieter, "Is the house going to be okay?" "The house is going to be exactly what it's always been," I told her. "A place your grandmother loved. A place I intend to keep taking care of for as long as I'm able. Whatever else happens with the grown-ups, that part isn't changing." She seemed to accept that. The way children accept the things adults tell them with enough certainty in their voice. She went back to running her palm along the pipe I had spinning in the vise, hunting for the warp, finding it faster now than she had a year before. I thought about that moment more than once in the days leading up to the hearing. Whatever the courtroom decided, whatever Judge Reyes ended up saying from that bench, none of it was going to change the fact that a little girl had learned, at 8 years old, to find the place where something stopped running true, with nothing but patience and the flat of her own hand. Louise would have called that the only inheritance that ever really mattered. Everything else, the house, the 4 acres, the trust paperwork, just the frame we hung it on. The night before the hearing, Kevin came by my house alone. The way he had before the meeting at Estelle's office, except this time he didn't sit stiff on the porch steps. He sat down heavy. The way a man sits when he's set something down he's been carrying a long while. I keep thinking about the version of me who would have believed Brittany's side of this a year ago. He said, "Not because I'm a bad person, because it was easier. Believing her didn't cost me anything. Believing you, standing up for you, that was going to cost me my marriage, maybe. I wasn't ready to pay that. Are you ready now? I asked him. I don't know if ready's the word, he said. I just know I'd rather lose a marriage built on a lie than keep one by staying quiet while my own father gets called incompetent in a courtroom. Mum used to say gentle and weak aren't the same word. I think I finally believe her. We sat on the porch a long while after that, not saying much else. Just two men getting ready, in our different ways, for a morning neither one of us had ever expected to face. He called me 2 nights before the hearing. Dad, he said. I could hear something different in his voice, something that had been building the whole 3 weeks. I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just be polite about it. I'm listening, I said. I didn't sign that petition, he said. I want you to know that clearly. Brittany and Donna did this without asking me, same as the doctor, same as the realtor walking the property. I found out about it from the process server, same as you basically did. I've been sitting in my own house for 3 weeks not knowing what to do. Because I love my wife. Dad. I love my daughter. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped being sure I actually knew either one of them anymore. I didn't say anything right away. I let him keep going. A man finding his own words after 2 years of silence deserves the room to finish finding them. I'm coming to that hearing, he said. And I'm not sitting on Brittany's side of the room. I should have said that a long time ago. I should have said a lot of things a long time ago. Mum used to tell me gentleness wasn't the same thing as spine. I think I finally understand what she meant. About 8 years too late. It's not too late, I told him. My voice wasn't quite as steady as I wanted it to be saying it. It's late, it's not too late. There's a difference. You just found it. The morning of the hearing, I dressed the way I'd dress for a job inspection 40 years ago. Press shirt, good boots. Nothing flashy. I wanted to walk into that courtroom looking exactly like what I was. A working man who'd never once needed to raise his voice to be taken seriously. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-panelled. A little worn at the edges, the way most county courthouses are after 80 years of use. Judge Constance Reyes presided. A woman in her 50s with a reputation, Estelle told me, for having very little patience for cases she considered frivolous. Brittany sat with her lawyer, Dustin Farr, at one table. Donna sat behind them in the gallery, alone. Brittany and Donna had both been named jointly on the underlying financial pressure. But only Brittany had technically filed as an interested family member seeking the conservatorship. Farr planned to use Donna's testimony as a supporting witness. Estelle and I sat at the other table. Kevin sat directly behind us, in the first row of the gallery, where anyone in that room could see plainly which side of this his son had chosen. Farr opened by reading a summary of his petition. The memory lapses, the susceptibility to undue influence. The pattern he claimed showed a vulnerable elderly man being isolated from his family's guidance. He was smoother than I expected. For a moment, listening to him lay it out in that calm legal cadence, I understood exactly how a story like that could work on a judge who didn't yet know the rest of it. Then Estelle stood up. It was her turn. She didn't raise her voice either. I noticed that, sitting beside her. 2 people in that room who didn't need volume to be dangerous. Your Honour, she said, I'd like to enter into evidence the report of Dr. Neil Prither, the physician retained by the petitioner's own mother, Donna Cole, to evaluate Mr. Ashby's cognitive competency this past April. Dr. Prather's own written conclusion, dated and signed, states, and I quote directly, Mr. Ashby's cognition is entirely intact, with no evidence supporting a competency concern of any kind. She let that sit a moment before continuing. I'd also like to enter a dated log, kept contemporaneously by Mr. Ashby, documenting an unauthorised property walkthrough conducted by a realtor on May the 14th of this year, while Mr. Ashby was not present and had not been asked for permission. And finally, Your Honour, I'd like to enter a certified copy of a notice of default, filed against both Donna Cole and Brittany Ashby jointly, regarding a rental property on Cove Road, currently past its cure period and proceeding toward a sheriff's sale. Judge Reyes looked up from the documents Estelle handed forward. Her expression had shifted from the neutral patience she'd started with to something considerably colder. Ms. Vance, the judge said, are you suggesting this petition is connected to the respondent family's own financial distress, rather than any genuine concern for Mr. Ashby's welfare? I'm not suggesting it, Your Honour, Estelle said. I'm demonstrating it. With dates, with documents, with the petitioner's own retained physician's findings, which directly contradict the central claim of her petition. Before Farr could respond, Judge Reyes asked whether Mr. Ashby wished to be heard directly. Since it was his competency being questioned, he had a right, if he chose, to address the court himself. I stood up. Estelle hadn't told me this moment might come, or if she suspected it might, she hadn't wanted to put words in my mouth ahead of time. I buttoned my jacket, the way I would have before walking a customer through a repair estimate 40 years ago. I spoke plain. Your Honour, I said, I've spent 50 years working with my hands. Mill floors, line shafts, feed rollers. I know the exact moment a piece of machinery starts to fail before it ever makes a sound a customer could hear. I bring that up because it's the only way I know how to explain what's happened in my family the last 2 years. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a warp happens, a little at a time, until somebody finally puts their hand flat against it and feels where it stopped running true. I looked at Brittany, not with anger, just with the plain steadiness I've used my whole life. My wife Louise died 4 years ago, I said. 2 weeks before she went into hospice, she asked me to promise her something at her bedside. Not to leave what we built to whoever loved me loudest, to leave it to whoever would still be standing here in 30 years. I built a trust to honour that promise, 2 years before any of this started. When nobody was watching, when nobody had a reason to think it mattered yet. I recorded it at the courthouse. Public record, plain as day. Nobody in my family ever once walked in and asked to see it. If they had, none of us would be standing in this room today. I looked at Judge Reyes. I'm not confused, Your Honour. I've never been confused. What's confused is the idea that an old man protecting a promise he made his dying wife is somehow the same thing as an old man who's lost his grip on reality. Those aren't the same thing. I'd ask the court to see the difference. Because I believe it does. I sat back down. The courtroom was very quiet. Kevin behind me had his hand pressed flat against his mouth. Farr called Donna to the stand next, hoping, I think, to salvage the petition with a personal account of her worry for me. It didn't go the way he wanted. Donna sat in the witness chair with her hands folded tight in her lap. When Estelle rose to cross-examine her, she didn't raise her voice either, the same steady register she'd used the entire hearing. Mrs. Cole, Estelle said, when did you first become aware that your daughter and son-in-law's rental property on Cove Road had fallen behind on its loan payments? Donna hesitated. About 2 months ago, maybe a little longer. And when did you first raise the subject of Mr. Ashby's cognitive health with your daughter? Another hesitation. Longer this time. Around the same time, I suppose. Around the same time, Estelle repeated, letting the words sit in the room. Mrs. Cole, isn't it true that you arranged Dr. Prather's visit specifically hoping his evaluation would support a competency concern, so that a conservatorship could be established over Mr. Ashby's assets? I was worried about him, Donna said. Her voice cracked slightly. That's the truth. I was worried, and I was also scared about the house on Cove Road. I know how that looks now, sitting here. But at the time, it didn't feel like two separate things. It felt like one problem I thought I could solve by taking control of another man's property, Estelle said. Not unkindly, just plainly. To solve a debt that belonged to you and your daughter, not to him. Donna didn't answer that. She didn't have an answer that wouldn't have confirmed exactly what Estelle was suggesting. Everyone in that courtroom, including Judge Reyes, understood the silence for what it was. Estelle let the silence sit a long moment before she continued. I could feel, sitting beside her, that she was deciding right there how far to press the one piece of information neither Brittany nor Farr yet knew we had. Mrs. Cole, Estelle said finally, I'd like to ask about the second loan you took out against the Cove Road property approximately 8 months ago. Donna's face went white. I don't see what that has to do with... When you applied for that second loan, Estelle said, did you disclose to the lender the existence of the first mortgage already secured against the same property? The courtroom had gone very still. Farr half rose from his chair. Your Honour, I object. This is entirely outside the scope of the petition before the court. It goes directly to motive, Your Honour, Estelle said, and to the credibility of the witness's claim that her actions toward Mr. Ashby were motivated purely by concern for his welfare. rather than by financial desperation of a scope this court has not yet fully heard. Judge Reyes considered a moment. I'll allow the question. Mrs. Cole, you may answer. Donna's hands had started to shake, just slightly, in her lap. I don't recall the exact details of the paperwork, she said. Her voice had lost all of its earlier composure. I had a broker help me with the application. I don't know what he disclosed or didn't disclose. I see, Estelle said. She did not press further. She didn't need to. The answer, or the shape of the non-answer, had already done the work she needed it to do. No further questions, Your Honour. She sat back down. I understood, watching Judge Reyes's face, that whatever doubt might have remained about the true nature of this petition had just finished dissolving. Judge Reyes called a 15-minute recess before closing arguments. I want to tell you about those 15 minutes. They were, in their own quiet way, harder than anything said inside the courtroom itself. I stepped out into the hallway to get some air. Kevin followed me. We stood by a tall window overlooking the courthouse square, the same square small-town lawyers and clerks had walked across for 100 years. Neither of us said much at first. I keep thinking about Mom, Kevin finally said. About what she'd think seeing all this. A courtroom. Lawyers. Her granddaughter's name on a filed trust document. She'd think it was a shame it ever had to come to this, I said. She'd also tell you it isn't really about the house, Kevin. It never was. It's about who shows up, who tells the truth, who's still standing in the room 30 years from now. She said that to me at her bedside. I've thought about it every single day since. Down the hall I could see Brittany sitting alone on a bench outside the courtroom doors. Far nowhere near her. On his phone with someone, probably another client. The way lawyers move through a building like they've got 6 fires going at once. Brittany looked smaller than she had at that Sunday dinner. Smaller than she had setting 2 glasses of sweet tea on my kitchen table. Fear does that to a person. It takes up all the room bravado used to fill. I don't know what I want to happen to her, Kevin said quietly, watching his wife from a distance. Is that terrible? I don't know if I want her to lose, or if I just want this whole thing to be over. It's not terrible, I told him. It's honest. You can want the truth to come out and still hurt for the person it comes out on. Those aren't opposites. I've felt both those things about Donna's whole situation with that lake property. I imagine I'll keep feeling both of them a while yet. When the bailiff called us back in, Farr stood for his closing. He argued, with the particular energy of a man who knows the ground has shifted under him, but hasn't yet admitted it out loud, that regardless of what had come out about Donna Cole's financial situation, the underlying question before the court remained whether Harold Ashby's estate needed additional protective oversight. That an elderly man managing a trust alone, without close family involvement, was inherently at risk. That the court had a duty to protect vulnerable seniors even absent a formal medical diagnosis. Judge Reyes let him finish without interruption, the way she'd let everyone finish that whole afternoon, patient in a manner that gave nothing away about which direction she was leaning. She looked down at the papers in front of her for a long moment, long enough that the courtroom had gone almost uncomfortably quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the old radiator ticking somewhere behind the bench. Then she took off her glasses, the way people do when they're about to say something they want heard clearly. Mr. Farr, she said, I've sat on this bench 19 years. I have seen a great many conservatorship petitions. Some of them are exactly what they claim to be. Families genuinely frightened for a parent who can no longer manage their own affairs. This is not one of those petitions, those. I have in front of me a signed and dated medical evaluation, commissioned by your client's own mother, that explicitly found no cognitive impairment. I have a documented pattern of unauthorized entry onto Mr. Ashby's property. And I have a notice of default that establishes, about as plainly as evidence ever establishes anything in this courtroom, a clear and pressing financial motive on the part of the petitioner and her mother for wanting access to Mr. Ashby's estate. She looked directly at Brittany for the first time since the hearing started. Mrs. Ashby, the judge said, I am not only denying this petition, I am entering a finding on the record that this filing appears to have been made, in bad faith, for the purpose of financial gain rather than genuine concern for Mr. Ashby's welfare. That finding will be part of the permanent record of this case, should it ever become relevant in any future proceeding. I watched Brittany's face while the judge said it. I didn't feel the triumph I might have expected to feel, sitting there. I felt something closer to what I feel when a machine I've fought with for hours finally comes back into true. A kind of tired relief, not celebration. Louise used to say satisfaction and joy aren't the same thing. Sitting in that courtroom, watching 2 years of quiet pressure collapse under the weight of its own documents, I understood exactly what she meant. Donna, in the gallery, had put her face in her hands. "There is one more matter," Judge Reyes said, before anyone could gather themselves to leave, "that I want addressed on the record since it's been raised in the filings before me. Ms. Vance, does the trust in question have any provision addressing situations where a beneficiary's parent attempts to interfere with, contest, or circumvent its terms through bad faith legal action?" Estelle stood again. "It does, Your Honour. The trust includes a standard no contest provision. Any beneficiary, or the parent or guardian acting on behalf of a minor beneficiary, who initiates a bad faith challenge to the trust's validity, forfeits any discretionary distributions the trustee might otherwise have chosen to make on their behalf during the trust's term." I hadn't planned to have that provision matter the way it was about to matter. I didn't walk into that courtroom with some clever trap already sprung. Estelle had built that clause into the trust 2 years earlier, simply as standard practice, the kind of boilerplate any careful lawyer includes. But standing there, hearing it read into the record, in open court, I understood for the first time exactly what it meant for Kevin. It meant that as trustee, I still held real discretion during my lifetime over certain distributions meant to support Ruthie's care and upbringing, money for her school, her activities, her needs as she grew. Distributions I had always fully intended to make freely and generously to whichever parent was actually raising her well. It also meant that Brittany's petition had just been found on the record to be a bad faith attempt to circumvent the trust, which meant Brittany herself specifically forfeited any right to receive or manage those discretionary distributions on Ruthie's behalf going forward. Kevin did not forfeit anything. Kevin's name wasn't on the petition. Kevin, sitting in that first row of the gallery where anyone could see which side of the room he'd chosen, remained exactly where he'd always been. A father with full standing to receive and manage what I chose to provide for his daughter's upbringing. Same as before. Same as I would have wanted regardless. It was, I realised sitting there, exactly the kind of outcome Louise would have called fitting. Not punishment for punishment's sake, just the plain, quiet consequence of who had actually stood where, when it mattered. Made visible and permanent, the way a survey makes a property line visible and permanent, whether anybody bothered to look at it before or not. Judge Reyes closed the hearing shortly after, denying the petition in full, entering the bad faith finding as requested, reminding both parties that any further filings regarding this trust would be reviewed with the current record in mind. Outside on the courthouse steps, in the ordinary daylight of an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the whole thing felt smaller than it had inside, the way most storms do once you're standing in the calm that follows them. Donna wouldn't look at me. She walked to her car with her shoulders drawn in tight, the posture of a woman doing arithmetic she didn't want to be doing, the 61 days on the Cove Road notice ticking down, with no rescue coming from the direction she'd spent 2 years working toward. Brittany stood by Farr's car a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she walked over to where I stood with Estelle and Kevin. "I'm not going to pretend I did this the right way," she said. Her voice had none of the brightness it usually carried, none of the confidence from that Sunday afternoon with the sweet tea. "I panicked. Mom panicked. We should have just told you the truth about the money instead of all of this." She gestured vaguely at the courthouse, at the whole shape of what she'd built. "I don't expect you to forgive that. I don't forgive it," I told her plain. Louise and I never lied to each other. I wasn't going to start lying to Brittany now, but I understand it a little better than I did yesterday. Fear does ugly math on people. I've seen it happen to better people than you, under worse pressure than a foreclosure. That doesn't make it right. It just makes it human. She nodded. For the first time in 2 years, I saw something in her face that looked less like calculation and more like an actual person standing there. Frightened. Out of options. Finally out of moves. "What happens to my mum's house?" she asked quietly. "The one on Cove Road." "That's not mine to fix," I said. "It was never mine to fix by taking my house instead. If your mother had come to me honestly 2 years ago and told me the truth, I might have found a way to help with some of it. That door isn't fully closed, Brittany. But it opens through honesty, not through a doctor's visit or a courtroom filing." It always did. She didn't say anything else. She got in her car and drove away. Donna's foreclosure ran its course over the following weeks, exactly the way these things run their course when nobody intervenes. A sheriff's sale, a new owner, a small item in the county legal notices that almost nobody reads. Kevin stayed on the courthouse steps after Brittany left. "Dad," he said, "I don't know what happens with my marriage after today. I don't know what Brittany and I look like 6 months from now. But I know I'm done being quiet in rooms where the wrong thing is happening. Mum would have hated who I've been the last 2 years. I hated who I've been." "Then don't be him anymore," I said. "That's the whole trick, son. It's not complicated. It's just hard. Every single day you just have to choose it again." We stood there a while longer, the two of us, on the steps of a courthouse I'd never expected to need. In a town I'd spent my whole life in. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my son looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was young enough to still think I could fix anything with the right tool and enough patience. He wasn't entirely wrong about that, as it turned out. I just needed a different kind of tool than the ones I kept in the workshop. The weeks after the hearing moved slower than the weeks before it. The way a mill floor goes quiet after a long shift. The machines still ticking as they cool. Everybody a little unsure what to do with their hands. Donna's foreclosure went through exactly the way these things go through when nobody steps in to stop them. The sheriff's sale on the Cove Road duplex happened on a Wednesday morning in late summer. A small notice in the county legal listings. A handful of investors bidding low. The property sold for $59,000, less than half of the $91,000 Donna and Brittany owed, across both loans combined. A property that had once been a source of pride, sold for a fraction of what it cost them. I heard about it from Marlene, same as I'd heard about the default in the first place. I felt exactly what I told Brittany I'd feel on those courthouse steps. Not triumph. Something closer to the tired weight of watching a structure come down that never should have been built the way it was built in the first place. Donna moved into a rental apartment on the north side of Bowling Green a few weeks later. I heard she took a job at a fabric store, folding bolts of cloth and running the register. Work she hadn't done since she was a young woman. I don't know what she thinks of me, if she thinks of me at all. I've made my peace with not knowing. Some doors close on their own. You don't have to slam them to feel them shut. Brittany and Kevin separated about 2 months after the hearing. It wasn't loud from what Kevin told me. No screaming matches, no thrown dishes. Just two people who'd built a marriage on a foundation that turned out, once you put your palm flat against it, to have been out of true for longer than either of them wanted to admit. Brittany kept an apartment in town. Kevin moved back into the house he and Brittany had shared before. They worked out the custody arrangement for Ruthie the Plain, procedural way these things get worked out, with lawyers and calendars instead of shouting. Here's something that matters more than the courtroom victory, more than the trust, more than any of the documents Estelle kept in that fireproof drawer. I did not feel glad about my son's marriage ending. I know how that might sound, given everything Brittany did. But I loved Louise for 51 years. I know what it costs a family when a marriage breaks, even one that broke for good reason. I grieved it a little. The way you grieve any structure you watched go up with hope in it, even after you've confirmed it was never sound. What I felt more than grief, though, was something Louise would have recognised instantly. She felt it every June, watching a classroom of 9-year-olds walk out her door in May, knowing with the particular faith of a schoolteacher that most of them were going to turn out fine, eventually, in their own time. I felt that same faith about Kevin. Not that everything had been fixed, just that something true had finally been set down where it could grow properly. Instead of bent and propped against a wall that was never going to hold it right, Kevin came by the house almost every Sunday now, the way he used to when he was a boy, before Brittany. Before the 2 years of soup and Simplify and a doctor with a leather folder, he'd bring Ruthie. The two of them would sit on my porch. Sometimes he'd help me with a project in the workshop. I noticed, the first few times, that he watched me work the way Ruthie used to watch me. Careful, curious, like he was trying to learn something he should have learned decades ago. Estelle called me about 6 weeks after the hearing, just to check in, she said. Though I suspect she also wanted to see how the family had settled once the dust cleared. I told her about Kevin's Sundays, about Ruthie's letter, about the tomatoes that never quite came in, as good as Louise's. You did this the hard way, Harold, she said. You know that, don't you? Most people in your position would have caved the first time somebody mentioned a doctor's visit. Or they'd have gone scorched earth the moment they found out about the second loan. You did neither. You just kept being exactly who you already were and let the truth catch up to everybody else at its own pace. Louise taught me that, I told her. She used to say the truth doesn't need help moving fast. It just needs somebody patient enough not to get in its way. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Estelle said. She was, I said. Every day I get up in that house is a day I'm still trying to live up to the plan she made. A legal pad. A dying woman's certainty about who'd still be standing here. Estelle was quiet a moment. For what it's worth, Harold, in 30 years of practicing law in this county, I've represented a lot of frightened old men. They came to me after it was too late, after the guardianship petition was already granted, after the house was already sold out from under them by a relative with better lawyers and less patience. You're the first client I've ever had who came to me 2 years early, on nothing but a promise to a dying woman and a hunch about how people behave when they think nobody's watching. That's not luck, Harold. That's a kind of foresight most people don't have the discipline for. I thought about that call a long time after we hung up, sitting on my porch with the evening coming down soft over the 4 acres. Foresight wasn't the word I'd have chosen for myself. I'd have called it something plainer. Just paying attention. Just noticing. The way you notice a shaft starting to warp, long before the noise gets loud enough for everybody else to hear it too. Kevin called me about 6 weeks after that and asked to come by the workshop on a Saturday. I told him I'd be there, same as always. I never asked you how to true a shaft, he said, standing in the workshop doorway with his hands in his pockets. Growing up, I never once asked. You never needed to, I told him. You had other things you were good at. Ruthie's the one who took to it. Doesn't mean you failed at anything, son. Just means you and I built different toolboxes. Will you teach me now? He asked. It's not too late, is it? I looked at my son a long moment. 42 years old, standing in a doorway he'd walked through 1,000 times as a boy, without ever once stepping all the way inside it. I felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for 2 years. It's never too late to true something up, I told him. Come here. Put your hand flat like this. I showed him the way I'd shown Ruthie, the way my own father had shown me, back when I was younger than Kevin was now, in a workshop that smelled the same way this one still smelled. Sawdust and machine oil. The particular quiet of a man teaching his child something with his hands instead of his words. Kevin's first few tries missed the warp entirely. His 5th try, he found it. I watched something settle in his face when he did. The look of a man discovering, a little late but not too late, exactly what his own hands were capable of. Once somebody finally showed him how to use them. About a year after the hearing, on a warm evening in late spring, I sat on my porch with Ruthie. She was 9 by then. I told her, for the first time plainly, about the letter her grandmother had left for her, sealed in an envelope in the workshop drawer. Grandma left me a letter? She asked, wide-eyed. The way children get wide-eyed about anything that sounds like a secret. She did, I said. Written the same week, she wrote down a lot of things about this family that turned out to matter, more than either of us understood at the time. I'm going to keep it safe until you're 18. That's what she wanted. But I want you to know it exists. I want you to know it has your name on it. Only your name. Because your grandmother saw something in you a long time before anybody else did. What did she see? Ruthie asked. That you were the kind of person who'd still be standing here in 30 years, I told her. Same as I am now. Same as she was in her own way, for 31 years in that schoolhouse. Some people love a place loud for a season, and then move on to loving something else loud. Other people just stay. Quiet. Doing the small right thing over and over, year after year, until one day you look up and realise they're the only ones left standing where it matters. That's your grandmother. I think it might be you too. She thought about that a long while. The way she thinks about everything. Then she asked the question that told me, more than anything else could have, that Louise had been right about her from the very beginning. Can I still come to the workshop, even after I get the letter? She asked. Even when I'm grown up? Ruthie, I told her, you can come to that workshop until the day I'm not here to open the door for you. After that, it's yours. Same as everything else. You can keep the door open for whoever earns the right to walk through it. The same way your grandmother taught me to figure out who that ought to be. I want to tell you what happened to the house itself. I think it matters as much as anything else in this story. I didn't sell it. I didn't downsize, the way Donna had spent 2 years suggesting I should. I kept living there, in the house I built with my own hands, on the 4 acres that used to belong to a mill company that doesn't exist anymore, tending the same garden Louise planted. Though I'll admit my tomatoes never came in quite as good as hers did. I painted the front room again last fall, the same pale yellow Louise picked the second time around. The colour she decided, after a year of living with it, that she actually loved. Ruthie helps me with the garden now, same as she used to help her grandmother, kneeling down without being asked, pulling the weeds gentle, at the root, never yanking. Kevin comes on Sundays, sometimes bringing a friend from work, sometimes just himself. We sit on the porch and talk about nothing important, which turns out to be exactly the kind of talking a father and son need most, after 2 years of talking about nothing at all. I don't know what became of Brittany, exactly, beyond what Kevin tells me in passing. I heard she moved to Louisville for a fresh start. I hope honestly that she finds one. I meant what I told her on those courthouse steps. Thea does ugly math on people. I've watched better people than her do worse things under worse pressure. I don't forgive what she did. I understand it a little better than I did the day she set 2 glasses of sweet tea on my kitchen table. I've decided, at 73 now, that understanding is sometimes as far as forgiveness needs to go. That's all right. Not every door has to open all the way to still let some light through. Kevin told me about a year after the divorce finalised that Brittany had sent him a short letter, out of nowhere, apologising for the doctor's visit specifically, saying it was the one thing she regretted most out of everything. More than the courtroom, more than the marriage ending. She said it was the moment she stopped treating me like a person and started treating me like a problem to be managed. Kevin showed me the letter. I read it twice, standing in my own kitchen, in the exact spot where she'd once set 2 glasses of sweet tea in front of me and told me the house was hers now. I didn't write back. Some things don't need an answer to be received, but I kept the letter, in the same fireproof drawer where Estelle kept everything else that mattered in this whole business. Louise taught me that a true apology, even a late one, even one you can't fully accept, is still worth keeping somewhere safe. It's still evidence of something, just not the kind you need a lawyer to read. I think about Donna sometimes too, more than I expected to. I heard through Marlene that she still works at that fabric store, that she's paid off most of what she owed on the second loan, slow and steady. The hard way, the way most real debts actually get paid when nobody's handing out shortcuts anymore. I don't know if she's forgiven herself. I don't know if she's the kind of woman who spends much time on forgiveness at all, in either direction. But I heard she started volunteering at the same elementary school where Louise used to teach, helping out in the front office a few mornings a week. I like to think that means something, even if I can't say exactly what. 2 years after the hearing, the Denards Mill Elementary School, the same school where Louise taught 3rd grade for 31 years, started a small scholarship fund for graduating 5th graders headed into middle school, given each spring to the student who showed, in the words the school board settled on, quiet, consistent care for others. I helped fund it, $500 a year, modestly, through the trust, using exactly the kind of discretionary distribution Estelle had once explained to a courtroom. Though nobody outside that courtroom ever knew the connection, we named it the Louise Ashby Award. The first year it was given, I sat in the gymnasium with Kevin beside me. I watched a boy named Marcus Feeney, who wasn't any relation to us at all, walk up to receive it. For spending his recesses helping a younger student with a stutter get through show and tell without anyone laughing. I cried a little, sitting there. That isn't something I do often, or admit to easily. Kevin noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just put his hand on my shoulder, the way I used to put mine on his when he was small. We sat there together, 2 men who'd finally learned the same lesson from 2 different distances. Ruthie won it herself 3 years later, the spring she turned 11. For a whole year of walking a younger boy home from the bus stop after his own father moved out. Never asked. Never mentioned to a teacher. Just done quietly because it needed doing. When they called her name in that same gymnasium, I looked over at Kevin. He was already looking at me. Both of us thinking the same thing without needing to say it. Louise would have known. Louise had known 4 years before Ruthie was even old enough to walk a stranger home, sitting at a hospital bedside with a legal pad in her lap, writing down the only word that ever mattered about that little girl. Stays. There's a thing I think about some evenings sitting on my porch with the light going gold over the 4 acres Louise and I built a whole life on top of. I think about the sentence she gave me at her bedside, the one I've repeated more times in this telling than I've probably repeated it in the 2 years since she died. Don't leave it to who loves you loudest. Leave it to who'll still be standing here in 30 years. I used to think that sentence was about the house, about the deed, about which name belonged on which piece of paper, in which drawer, at which county office. I understand now that it was never about the deed at all. It was about learning to see clearly, in the middle of noise and pressure, and people who love loud and leave quiet, exactly who's actually standing beside you when the noise finally dies down. Ruthie was standing there. Kevin found his way back to standing there. Later than I would have liked. But standing there all the same. I like to think, on my better days, that Louise is still standing there too, in the pale yellow of that front room, in the tomatoes that never quite come in, as good as hers, in a granddaughter's steady hand finding the warp in a spinning shaft on the second try instead of the fifth. I never threw a punch in this whole business. I never raised my voice. Not once. Not at Brittany. Not at Donna. Not even in the moments I had every right to. I want that understood plainly. I think it's the whole point of everything I've told you. The only tools I ever used were patience, and a promise I kept to a dying woman, and the plain, unglamorous truth, laid out flat on a table where anyone willing to look could finally see it. That's not weakness. I learned that a long time ago. On a mill floor, with my hand flat against a spinning shaft, feeling for the place where something stopped running true. A man doesn't need volume to fix what's broken. He just needs to know exactly where to put his hand. Enough patience to wait for the moment the whole room finally sees what he's already known for years. I still keep the porch light on every night, the way Louise always did, for whoever might still be finding their way home. Kevin knows it's on. Ruthie knows it's on. Some Sunday evening not too far from now, I expect that light's going to matter to somebody in this family, in a way none of us have needed it to yet. Until then, I'll be right here, on Kettle Run Road, in the house I built with my own 2 hands, keeping everything true.